Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada.
We appreciate you coming on. This is fantastic.
Yeah, no problem at all. Happy to join.
Yeah, so I thought I would start. Ray, I've been looking at your content on your blog for a while there. Whenever I need to get something or recommend something to somebody else, I just point them to your blog because I just don't have enough experience and knowledge around a lot of this stuff. But how did you get started? We went through your bio and stuff, but tell people how you kind of got started in this. And you were originally in Seattle, right?
Yep, yeah, correct. I grew up in Seattle and but moved to DC. So the name DC Rainmaker really comes from being in Washington, DC. And you know how like when you sign up for AOL the very first time 20 years ago, you try to find a screen name that no one else has? That's essentially what happened here. I just typed in my name, it didn't work, and eventually typed in a city name, and you got DC Rainmaker. And I did it basically as a starting point for kind of a journey into triathlon, a journey towards the first Ironman that I signed up for. So I started up with the blog, essentially the way to chronicle my journey towards my very first Ironman from 1 year out. Because back in that day, you signed up on site in person at an Ironman site, and then you had 1 year to basically prepare for that race. And so it started out primarily as like a training kind of blog, and then over time it has morphed into being a product review kind of locale.
I'm just curious, but how many Ironmans have you done so far? Can you even keep track, or is it?
Yeah, the Ironmans are easier. So I think I've done 5, I think, but a lot more half Ironmans. So I think, most people tend to do like 1, maybe at most 2 Ironmans a year, but they do a lot more half Ironmans. And I have no idea how many of those I've done, or marathons or half marathons and things like that.
And now you're based in Amsterdam. And is
Yep.
that a big difference in terms of how you do your stuff, or is it just doesn't really make a difference?
It's not too much different in the grand scheme of things. I can kind of like swim, bike, run pretty much anywhere. And that's kind of the neat part of working out. And of course, different locations have different features. Like here in Amsterdam, it is pancake flat. Like the only hill I've got is a highway overpass. So I don't quite have that, but I've got awesome bike infrastructure and stuff like that I can use in different areas. My reviews around, like for example, cycling, commuting, and in those areas.
So when did you move to Amsterdam?
4 years ago, I think now. So I've been in Europe for 10 years this summer. Originally moved from Washington, D.C. to Paris for work, and then stayed there and eventually kind of made this my full-time gig. And so after that, a few years of that, moved up to Amsterdam just kind of on a whim. It's one of those cities we always visited from Paris for the weekend because it's only a few hours by train. And then once you're here, the bike infrastructure and there's kind of the whole cycling lifestyle is just amazing.
Wow. Yeah, and you know what? I remember I've had some encounters with different triathlon groups and all that, and there was always this joke around triathletes that a lot of triathletes have disposable income. So your documenting product reviews and all that seemed like a really good fit. Or I assume you have a lot of people following you and wanting to get new gadgets and all that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, there's kind of an extension of that joke in that there's not like a product a triathlete won't buy, right? And it's the same thing here. And my goal is to try to help figure out what products are worthwhile buying and what products are just kind of junk. But it goes beyond triathlon. It's running and cycling and action cameras. And I think also even at sort of the less intense side of it, activity trackers, things like a Fitbit or something along those lines, where people are just trying to get healthy. And so that then can extend into like weight scales, like which Wi-Fi connected weight scales are worth the money, which ones are just kind of a pile of junk.
It's wild. Derek and I have been on the topic for, I think a few years now, because, wearables came into the market and then you're just seeing so much, I think, diversification now between a ring or a chest strap, a wrist strap.
Yep.
And it's kind of ironic. I mean, we were just having a conversation about the wrist wearables, right? And I was speaking to a major company, like one of the premier heart rate companies. And I just threw it out there. I was like, guys, let me ask you a question. You sent me a chest strap and a wristwatch. And the guy's like, because the chest strap is way more accurate. And I just started laughing, right? But yet a lot of companies out there now are trying to make claims that, no, this is fine. What have you gotten in your experience?
It's all over the map. It varies a lot by brand, by model, by activity is really one of the bigger aspects as well. So if you take something like steady state running, the vast majority of wrist-based, major brand name models that you're familiar with can do steady state running just fine and dandy. They'll track it, and outside of an errand, a couple seconds here and there, it'll be pretty good. If you step that up to something like interval running, like 800-meter repeats or along those lines, most of the units these days can do that well, also quite as well. Like that's not usually too much of an issue. Where that gets more complicated is you do interval running in the middle of the winter. So now you have, colder wrists, perhaps you're not wearing like a long sleeve coat or something like that. And that decreases your blood flow to your extremities, which in turn decreases the ability for those devices to accurately kind of latch onto that. And then you keep on like stepping this up. So then you go, okay, I'm gonna go out cycling. Now you're holding onto your handlebars really tight so that increases the flex there, and that makes it more challenging. And then you go from there to something like all the weights behind you. And again, you have this, kind of you're holding on to something very, very tight, which makes it more difficult for this to track what's going on. So there is kind of a broad spectrum there. I think one of the things that's probably most interesting is that a lot of people think about optical heart rate as being good or bad. And it's really about placement of that optical heart rate and that sensor. So take, for example, something like the Whoop strap. Here on the wrist, in a gym setting like yours, it's not going to be super awesome. It's going to be pretty bad in general. But you take the same sensor and you move it up to just your bicep or anywhere else on your arm, and the accuracy goes very, very high pretty quickly, and it's quite acceptable at those levels there. And so it's really about kind of where that sensor is relative to what workout and intensity you're doing.
Wow.
I never thought about the grip piece, Don.
Yeah, I
Have
didn't
you?
think about it either. And I'm sure for swimming, there's another variable now too. I mean, when I wore Whoop years ago, I remember getting in the pool and trying to do some lap work, and I just couldn't do it. It kept flipping all over. I got really frustrated with it, and I just kind of immediately got rid of it after that. But I didn't even think about the steady state. You're always thinking about the arm action, but yeah, those arms are going to move at a different pace if you're doing like a 400 or if you're turning around and doing a 5K, right? I mean, that's going to be a bit different.
Yep, one of the big things when you look at running in particular, but this really transcends across most of the different areas, is what's called cadence lock. So in running, we think about an optical sensor, it's trying to see through your skin, and it's trying to look at your blood flow inside of that. And there's kind of one big area that when it makes a mistake, it locks onto your running cadence, because that's the next loudest thing from this wristwatch's perspective, is it's your pounding of your feet against the ground. So one of the most common errors is for a optical heart rate sensor to get cadence lock, meaning it's going to start locking to whatever you're doing from a running standpoint. And that's especially common when you're going downhill, because in that case you have lower intensity, but you've got this big bang at a higher RPM or higher frequency. And the same is true for sprints, where your heart rate in a sprint is typically a lagging indicator, so it doesn't catch up right away to what you're feeling. So if you go and sprint 200 meters, it'll take like at least 100 meters for your heart rate to go, oh wow, that's just starting to hurt a bit. And the same is true for an optical heart rate sensor. It's looking at that and going, this person's heart rate isn't high, but I'm hearing all this pounding. Maybe I should latch on to that cadence signal instead. And so that's like one of the things when you look at optical heart rate across the board, companies are always trying to fix that like 1% error. And so you take a company like Apple or Garmin or Polar, and it works like 98% of the time, but there's like 1% left, and that 1% is divided into 100 other 1/100ths of a percent they're trying to fix. And sometimes you fix one thing over here, and then you break some other scenario over here, and this has been repeating for a decade or so now.
Wow. I didn't ever even thought of all that, but one thing Don and I have been going back and forth about is Apple. The Apple Watch, and I had, I think, the second generation, and I'm like, but now their tech has improved in terms of monitoring heart rate and other things. What have you seen that Apple has done?
Definitely. I think Apple is, without question, one of the leaders in the space now from an optical heart rate standpoint, in terms of especially workout heart rate. They don't actually monitor as frequently for kind of throughout the day, 24/7 heart rate, as some of the competitors do, but they monitor it at a point that it's perfectly fine. But for workout heart rate, they're very, very good. They very rarely have dropouts or spikes or things like that. The one caveat to the Apple Watch is they have kind of a weird quirk in that when you start a heart rate or start a workout on a Apple Watch, you press the start button, it then attempts to lock onto the signal of your heart rate. So you press start, and it's starting your counter and your pace and that, your instinct is to start running, of course, because you don't want your average supposed to be all off. But unfortunately, it doesn't have heart rate lock then until what could be 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes down the road. And so there's this weird gap. And it's always been kind of a weird Apple Watch quirk compared to almost every other watch on the market. You wait for heart rate lock until it shows a little heart rate icon being steady, and then you press start. But once it's got that lock, Apple is very, very good at heart rate these days.
So, I mean, it seems pretty obvious that all of these wearables might be good in a specific area and lacking in another area, right? Like I've seen with specific wearables that you're wearing right now that, you might go in and do an activity like golf and your strain is up around an 18, and I might see someone turn around and, do an endurance event and lift weights and their strains at a 13 when clearly they were doing more work. Are they trying to be good at too many things? Are there just certain areas right now that they're just not there with yet? Are they just trying to claim to be way better than they are in every category?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So, like in that scenario, you're probably referring to Whoop and its strain there, and that's a challenge because unlike every other watch out there, you can pair a heart rate strap to most watches. So if there's something wrong accuracy wise in a given activity, for example intervals or whatever, you pair a chest strap, and for the most part, most chest straps work just fine, especially as long as there's some sort of like sweat or spit or whatever you want on there to keep it, conductive. But with Whoop, they don't allow that. So you're beholden to this being accurate in every scenario. And like golf is a good one, or even me washing the dishes. I've had times where I'm just washing the dishes, and this is putting out a strain that is higher than a 5-hour ride in the mountains, the middle of summer, right? But there's no way to correct that. And that's part of the core challenge that I've had with Whoop as a device from a strain standpoint, is that you can't erase that. So it'd be one thing if you could say, okay, this is bad data, let me just nullify it out. Or another thing, if you could be allowed to pair a chest strap or some other accurate device to get that. Because I think what Whoop is doing, what others are doing around strain and training load is generally very good. It's just that you have to have that underlying data be accurate. And this is true of every device. If you just use the optical wrist sensor on a Garmin and use that training load may or may not be correct. But at least you have the option to make it more accurate based on choosing a different sensor.
Now, Ray, you're wearing a bunch of different things. Do you always wear all these things, or do you, like, if you're going for a run, I'm definitely going to wear this one. If I'm going for a ride, I'm going to wear this one. If I want a sleep monitor, I switch to this. How do you do that, knowing what you know and all the products you know about?
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of have like two camps of stuff. Mostly I have stuff that I'm that need to test. So devices that, I've got a review coming up tomorrow. So I'm going to wear that device to make sure I've got, I need for that review tomorrow, next week, next month, et cetera. Then I've got devices that I'll fall back on if I'm not testing anything else. So one of those being like the 745 from Garmin. That's kind of like my fallback device if I'm not testing anything else. Now for tonight, I just put it on because I can't show you what it's coming out tomorrow. So this is what's there for the moment. And then I've got devices like the Whoop Band and the Oura Ring, where I've got those on. It's sort of like a long-term thing because these are really long-term devices. And I'm less interested personally in this particular data for the reasons I just kind of outlined a minute ago. But for my job, if you will, I need to know, how these devices work over the long term, and when there's new features and new things like that, to know what those new features mean and how they change. So, I kind of tend to be, if I'm not doing anything else, I'm just going to wear a single watch, but that is very, very rare in the grand scheme of my year.
I guess with the whole user interface that they're putting together, there's probably data that, that you just like how it's delivered from one compared to the other. Like I've been wearing the Oura, and where I've really been enjoying that is, I think, looking at some basic numbers like, total sleep. I like to look at it from a weekly standpoint or even a monthly standpoint to just see if there's some good trends going on, to see if, some of the behaviors that I'm, changing in my life are affecting that in a positive way. But there's other things that I just, that I don't necessarily, if I wake up and my HRV is a bit low and I feel great and it's a training day, with my schedule, I'm going to go do it. I'm not going to turn around and say, oh, well, maybe we're going to cut back on the intensity today. I'm going in, I'm lifting with my team. we're going for a big lift. I feel great. I'm going for it. And that's just how it is. How much do we need to be stuck to the numbers, or something that you said was very refreshing? You're wearing this for more of a long-term understanding, right? And then you can make those adjustments based on that.
Indeed, I think like HRV is a great example of that. There's been a lot of focus on HRV, especially over the last few years. It's really peaked in the last 18 months or so. And this kind of this mantra that HRV is the one holy number to focus on. And I don't think that's a really good idea. I think for a few reasons. One, it was never designed that way. It was designed to figure out whether someone that comes into an emergency room is going to die or not. That was its original purpose in kind of the medical realm. And then, the fitness side has latched onto it. But for the reasons that you noticed or noted, it's all over the map. And it isn't necessarily super accurate on a day-to-day basis. It can be useful in long-term trending. But, if I were to pay attention to the HRV values, the recommendations from Whoop or any of these devices day to day, like you said, I'd never do anything. I'd wake up every single day and it'd be like, nope, nothing today. You can skip this day again. And then other days where I'm completely beat. I've come off of red-eye flights. Just last week, I came off a red-eye flight. I slept like 2 hours on this transatlantic flight, and it gave me like this recovery score that says, yep, you can go out right now and run like a 20-miler. And I'm like,
really?
Come on.
I don't want to hear that now. I don't want to
Yeah.
hear that now.
That's funny. One thing that Don and I are looking at right now is treadmill running. We both have a true form curved non-motorized treadmill. He has another one from Life Fitness, a hammer strength but we find that using those devices, it's hard to really get good information because I don't think a lot of them are calibrated for speed and properly. And then I saw you reviewed a device that somebody had told me about, a North Pole device to measure speed as well. And do you have other recommendations for people who are running on treadmills and how to monitor that mode?
Definitely. Yeah. I'd say, treadmill accuracy is a hot mess across the board. I used to travel a lot. I used to travel 52 weeks a year. I spent, 200 plus nights a year in a hotel. And I have tried every treadmill on this planet. And it was astounding because a lot of hotels would have like these limits that are posted that saying, hey, 20 minutes per treadmill. So I would go from treadmill to treadmill because I'm like, well, that's the rule. So I'd be like 20 minutes here, 20 minutes here, 20 minutes here, 20 minutes here. Because I'd be in a lot of countries where you couldn't run outside at night, right? Especially in like Central America or in Africa. And so that just wasn't an option. So I'd be like just going down the list. You sit there and go from one interval to the next interval, one treadmill to the next treadmill was vastly different speeds. And eventually I just came to rely upon a foot pod for most treadmills. And so you can get basic foot pods, or you can get more advanced ones like the Stride running foot pod as example. So if you're doing hotels a lot, that's a great way to have that on your shoe at all times. Or if you've got your own treadmill where you don't need to worry about wearing a foot pod, then the North Pole Run, RUNN, is really the best option. It's what I've got on my treadmills to just broadcast out your pace and your cadence, or your pace and your speed effectively. And then you can pair it up to any watch or to, even things like Zwift or other running platforms.
So I'm actually embarrassed to admit, I don't know what a foot pod is. Is that just a foot monitor that would like attach to your sneaker? I'm assuming.
Yep. It's a little, I don't have like a shoe close enough, but it's something like the size of a cherry, I guess, that you can put on the top of your shoe, and it snaps into your laces and it sits there.
Is there a difference in brands? Are they higher quality, or they all just kind of do the same job?
It used to be like 5 to 7 years ago that there was a lot of brands out there doing this, but as wristwatches have gotten better and better at estimated pace indoors, most of the foot pods have gone away. And so there is actually very few models on the market these days. And Stride is kind of the one remaining one left for the most part at the higher end, unfortunately. But yeah, it's definitely an option. That said, I think people would be surprised how good estimated pace is on most wristwatches. In fact, I find it generally better than most treadmills. And one of the things to keep in mind is when the estimated pace is calculated from a wristwatch, it's doing that based on your time outdoors in those pace buckets. So if you think about your pace as a whole bunch of a range of paces from full on sprinting to slow, steady state running, the more time you spend in each one of those buckets, it learns. And so it learns, here's the kind of effectively the algorithm for this particular pace bucket, this particular pace bucket, because your stride, your mechanics are different speeds there. And so, and that's especially useful if you can do that out in areas that have good GPS signal. So if you're just doing this purely on trail running and try to pull that into a treadmill, it's not going to work that well. But if you're out road running and then go on a treadmill, it'll generally be pretty accurate in most cases.
All right, so what about, I mean, this is going to sound like a really basic question, but I'm going to have to ask this, right? Because I had a call Derek last week about this. Someone contacts me and they're like, listen, I need to wear a specific wearable that's going to be able to measure heart rate, distance, average speed, maybe map out the course of the distance that I ran, just really basic stuff.
Yep.
Do you have your favorites out there? Are you allowed to talk about that?
Yeah, I think I have favorites from most. I think, like you said, it's basic stuff in that category, and in pretty much most of the watches are going to do that well. So whether you get an Apple Watch, whether it's a Series 3, which is like 169, or a Series 7, which is $400, or you get a Garmin, which has in their range down at the base is something like the Garmin, Forerunner 45, that's 150ish or so, and then all the way up to higher end ones like their mid range ones, the Garmin Forerunner 245, for example, in the mid 200s. Those are solid watches. Yep, there you go. Very, very solid running watches. And then you go to like Polar, for example, has some watches, the Vantage M2 in that category. And Chorus is another great brand. It's a smaller brand, but they're doing amazing work on features and quickly kind of catching up to the Garmins of the world. And so the Chorus Pace 2 at $199 is a fantastic deal there.
Huh, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I ended up going with the 245 just based on your review, and it seemed like it did everything pretty well and it wasn't too expensive. And
yep. Yeah, it's a really solid runner's watch, especially. I mean, it's good for all sorts of sports, but it really excels at running, and the price point is very, very good.
Are you able to play? This sounds like a stupid question. Are you able to play music on that?
There's two different. Yep, yeah, there's two different editions: a bass and a music edition.
Huh, interesting. But the Apple, I mean, Apple. We were talking about this earlier. Apple is clearly making a push to become more of this medical grade device. Do you feel at a certain point, just due to their infrastructure, due to their financial situation, that they're just going to own this market? I mean, how do other companies really compete with that?
Yeah, it's funny. It's one of those things that I think if we went back to when Apple first got into the Apple Watch game, 8 years ago or something like that, now 9 years ago, everyone said everyone else is going to die off. And in some ways, it's been the opposite. Now, certainly, we've lost some wearable companies over this time period. I think that would happen in any particular market segment over the course of a decade. But you look at Garmin. Garmin is posting quarter after quarter the best financial years they've ever had in their entire existence, especially on the wearables front. If they break out their segments by outdoors and fitness, and it's kind of a bit of like Apple has caused this entire tide to rise across the board. Undoubtedly, Apple selling way more watches than everyone else. It's not even a competition anymore as to how many more watches they sell than everyone else. But they are attracting attention to other brands as well, which is helping. And in the case of medical, I think they are leading that way there, both in terms of features, but also kind of the integration into both academia as well as medical. But we are seeing others kind of dabble into that field a little bit. And some of that, of course, is marketing. So you take something like ECG functionality, where for most people, you're going to do the ECG once when you buy an Apple Watch or Samsung Watch or Fitbit, and then you're never going to do it again. You're going to be like, oh, that was cool. I'm alive. Cool. And that's it. But one, it sells a lot of watches. And then two, for those people that do need to do frequent ECGs, it is, no pun intended, a lifesaver. The ability for them to quickly do that on the wrist at any point in time is huge. And Fitbit just announced, for example, this week, the ability to now have that happen passively behind the scenes. So it's just doing it 24/7 versus an Apple Watch. You have to stop and actually do the ECG there manually. And so that kind of stuff, I think, could be more meaningful over time. It will become more meaningful, but it's also a very complicated process for companies to get into that game.
Do you find that people are deterred by having to charge it every evening? Or because I that's why I like the Garmin. I get maybe 6 days, 7 days. I don't have to worry about it. I got enough things to do. I got to feed the kids. I got, now they want a dog. Plugging in my Apple Watch every night, that seems like an extra thing I don't want to do.
I think it definitely is for some people, and other people it just doesn't matter. It's totally. I am surprised with Apple's I don't want to call it strong-headedness, but devotion to their one-day battery cause. Because I would have thought by now, like in all the iterations that we've had of Apple Watch, all the things that they gave us that we'd never asked for, like the 1 millimeter larger display on the latest edition, right? And you're like, nobody thought we needed a bigger watch, bigger display, but I appreciate it. But I really would have liked some more battery life. And so I wonder at what point they're finally going to be like, okay, fine, here's an extra day of battery life. But until then, yeah, you've essentially got to make a choice between that and something else. And I think we are seeing, for example, Garmin has really upped the game with Epix series and their AMOLED displays. So in the smartwatch world, you have displays like this one that are kind of fairly basic and like your watch as well, and aren't super sexy, and they get the job done. And because of that, they last a really long time battery life wise, weeks or even a month. Versus an Apple Watch, the core reason why it has short battery life is the display is just a blowtorch. It's absolutely burning through battery. And so those are AMOLED displays, and we've seen Garmin start to really kind of focus in that area in the last 6 months or so. Where now their AMOLED displays can get up to 6 days of battery life, despite the size not being that much bigger than an Apple Watch. And I think we're just going to see that trend continue over time.
Well, backing up really quick to the treadmill conversation, because that I don't really understand, right? Like, we're talking about battery life evolving, we're talking about all this technology evolving, but you're purchasing a treadmill for probably anywhere between $3 and some of these Woodways can get up north of $10,000, right? Yet every single treadmill I jump on, it's obvious. I mean, what your pace is, and when you finish up and you look down and go, wait a second, I did not run that. Why? How? I don't get it.
There's essentially been no competition or innovation in the treadmill space for a very long time. And I think that's largely because there's really only like 2 treadmill companies that own like 19 different brands underneath them. And so there's no reason for them to compete or innovate. And I think we're starting to see, to Peloton's credit, for example, Peloton has kind of pushed, I think, the dials a little bit there. And, that's a treadmill that, and from a core treadmill standpoint, it's not that much different than any other treadmill. It goes around and around, you run on it, right? It's just like a hamster. But in terms of the features that people want, a big display and easy to use and not feeling like it's something they jumped on, from a gym in the 1980s, they're pushing that envelope forward. And I think we're starting to see the Lifetime Fitness of the world react to that in some of their newer models. And now whether or not that extends to things like accuracy, I don't know. It's tough because, in general, the crowd that's buying a base Lifetime Fitness or a base Peloton treadmill isn't hyper focused on accuracy. And they know that, at the higher ends that you can get a bit more money out of people for that.
Have you taken a deep dive into the connected fitness Peloton models and seen what they provide? Is there anything in there where you're like, that's pretty good? Or
they do some pretty impressive stuff. I think, one of the challenges with Peloton is that it is a media dumpster fire, meaning that anything that Peloton does, kind of like Tesla or even Apple to a degree, gets scrutinized, umpteen different ways. Even if it's perfectly good, it gets just sliced and diced into somehow being wrong. And I think one of the things when I look at Peloton, I've got one here, I've got one at home, and I pay for both of them, and they are very, very good. And like when you jump on it, the key thing about a Peloton device is it just works, right? It just works every single time, which is not something you can say about necessarily every other treadmill or even every other stationary bike. There's always a lot of fiddling and stuff. And we see that carry through to the retention rates. I mean, their retention rates are absolutely insane. They've got 99.2% retention rate for the subscriptions, and they're landing roughly 1/4 to 1/3 of a million new bikes per quarter into households, which is like absolutely insane if you look at the numbers to the rest of the industry. Yeah, and the fact that they're retaining people tells you they're doing things right. Now, are there things I'd like to see them change? Absolutely. Of course, there's plenty of things that you're like, I wish I could focus on accuracy or open compatibility, all that kind of stuff. But they figured out that model. Again, you step away from the media like firestorm of weird headlines, and you kind of peel back to what's actually going on from the tech side or even the financial side, and you go, okay, they've kind of got this figured out with some minor tweaks.
Yeah, no, Don and I have been talking about that, and we were always like, even just this idea of having sort of like, connected fitness, but also like a virtual reality experience. And Don just got his Oculus glasses, and we've been doing some 360 video stuff. So it's been pretty cool. Is there anything down the road that you see it evolving into?
I think we'll see more of that. I've got for example, in that kind of realm of connected fitness and AI type stuff, I've got the Peloton guide sitting over there. It just arrived today. And that's, designed to, in theory, walk you through mostly strength-based workouts and iterates through. And I think based on everything I've seen thus far, it's probably a little bit early in that device's lifetime because it doesn't automatically count reps today, for example. It doesn't fix your form. And those are the things that I think people really want from that kind of device. Those are things I would want anyways, to know whether or not, I mean, certainly you guys know that, form is a critical component of, if not the most important component of the gym workouts. And so the fact that it doesn't have that means it's a gap there, but I think over time that'll become the norm in the same way that, running devices give you all sorts of other suggestions about training load and intensity and recovery. I think the same will ultimately happen in the gym for form and in those areas.
It's funny. I just saw this. A buddy of mine's a part of this company called Altus. I don't know if you heard of them yet, but they're an AI company. And Derek, I didn't think, like, in the beginning, I'm thinking, well, we all move differently, and someone's going to squat more vertical. This one's going to probably hinge a little bit more. How is it going to be able to depict between what's right and wrong? And he ran me through a kind of a little demo. I was shocked. I couldn't believe how easily it picked up on the right knee just buckles a little bit, or drops in, goes a little valgus. It's immediately, there's an indicator telling you to correct this, and it's pointing it out in a very user-friendly way. Listen, this is where it's going, right? I mean, it's going to get to a point where in 10 years, you're going to be running on a treadmill, you're going to be working out at home, and you're going to have your virtual coach yelling at you. We're a lot closer right now than I ever imagined, but I'm still blown away how the wrist wearable still isn't there yet. You know what I'm saying? It's just, it doesn't make sense to me. That's the one thing I think in tech, in fitness, that I'm like, why hasn't this evolved quick enough? And is it, we were talking to our buddy, Brandon Marcello, who's very into this sort of thing. And he was mentioning that a lot of these companies, they're kind of okay with being, I'm making this number up, 75%, they're not, for them to reinvest into, getting their product to 100%, it's going to be very costly. Like, what companies can, afford to do this besides Apple? Do you think there's some value in that, or are you disagreeing, or do you think we're further along?
Yeah. I think it's tricky. I think for the majority of these companies, one of the core things that drives optical heart rate accuracy is the power they're willing to give it. Meaning that the actual battery power they can give that optical heart rate sensor. So that's why when you're using it, just sitting here like we're talking right now, it's actually reduced its battery profile quite significantly. So it's not trying to track a high intensity activity. But when you go into workout mode, it increases power to that module, which brightens the lights up quite a bit, and it gets more accurate. And for wearables companies today, it's this constant battle between new features that require more power, so the fancier displays or music playback and all those kind of things, and that then takes away power that they can give to the optical heart rate sensor without reducing battery life down to 1 day, which maybe Apple's onto something there, right? Maybe at the end of the day, the trade-off is you get 1 day of battery life, but you get really good heart rate. So you choose. And of course, Apple is driven mostly by display, but still, they can be more free in their battery usage because no one has expectations that it's going to last beyond the day. So it's just a simple saying, we're going to burn as much as we can to get the most accurate results, and then deal with the battery problem another day.
I'm a bit torn, Derek, because I'm in the market to buy some type of wearable that can at least measure, how far I've been running, or, what my intervals are at, or, heart rate. Great. If I can get an accurate heart rate out of it, fantastic. I would love music if I'm going to be doing a 5K. I just get bored easily. It's just how I'm built. But, I do not want all of that additional stuff. I don't want emails on my watch. I don't want to be like, I check email enough. I don't want to be in the habit of checking email now when I'm trying to disconnect from my phone, or text messages coming in when I'm running. That's distracting. That's my half hour or my hour to disconnect. My question is it worth the trade-off? Is it like, no, man, like, turn those features off. The Apple wearable, it's going to be the best thing. It's costly, but it's the best, you're going to get all those things that you're asking for? Or is it like, no, man, like you don't need to spend the money, you're actually getting a better product with going somewhere else? Because I'm one of those people that I just want the best product for what it is that I need it for.
Yep. I think one of the big kind of dividing lines in the sand between an Apple Watch and all the other fitness focused competitors is that fitness focused aspect. So an Apple Watch is, I think, the best daily smartwatch. So it's the best watch for the other 23 hours of the day that you're not working out, minus kind of like sleep tracking. But like in terms of just the rest of your day, you know, going to try to catch a flight and getting information on your wrist there, or just being around the office, that kind of stuff, it is by far the best in that category. But it's not the best when it comes to fitness tracking and fitness structure and what it gives you, the features, the recommendations. None of that really exists on the Apple Watch unless you start downloading third-party apps. And you know, there are many, many apps, and some of them are very, very good. Like Athletic, for example, that's an app spelled with a Y, so spelled kind of weird, that essentially replicates what Whoop has done, but using the Apple Watch. So that takes care of like the sleep recovery workout sort of phase, but it won't necessarily go out and give you a full structured workout to execute. So you need another app for that. And then if you wanted to, you know, follow a course while hiking, you need another app for that. And so you end up on an Apple Watch with all these apps to get the same functionality that you would on a Garmin or a Polar or Suunto or something like that. But those other watches don't have anywhere near the finesse of the rest of the day from a daily activity standpoint. Like you can't pull up your email on a Garmin watch. You can't, you know, control like your smartphone camera from a Garmin. There's all these little things that you can't do, even out of something as silly as the vibration motor on an Apple Watch. It is so good. It's just like this perfectly, like I undoubtedly, Apple has spent umpteen different engineers sitting in the lab going, how does that feel? No, how's that feel? Right? Over and over and over again for months to have this perfect vibration motor. Whereas Garmin is like, yeah, that'll do. And so it's a difference there.
Yeah, it's those nuances that Apple has that are very interesting. Now, GPS, is it pretty much generic across the board? Everybody gets the same signal, same accuracy. Like I was on my bike the other day, and I have obviously a computer on the bike, and it's telling me I'm going this fast, and I'm looking at the GPS on my watch, and there's a discrepancy. I have GPS monitors I put on my kids when they play sports, and I know that they're off by a mile per hour in velocity or something. Is it pretty much across the board? That's what we get? GPS is kind of not exactly really accurate?
It depends. Again, just like optical heart rate, it's a wide variety of stuff. I think what we are seeing will be the next big shift towards accuracy. So starting last summer, we started seeing companies introduced GPS watches, what's called dual frequency or multi-band GPS, which means they effectively more than double the number of satellites they connect to, and that dramatically increases accuracy, especially in harder areas. So like in New York City or underneath a mountain ledge that may go thousands of feet up, that kind of stuff. And in my testing, that's certainly the case. I was in New York City just a couple of weeks ago and did some testing there. They'll be kind of publishing soon, but the spoiler is it's really impressive in those sort of really hard environments compared to units that were not so impressive. And so we've seen Garmin add that in some of their watches earlier this year, their higher end watches. But I think over the course of this year, 2022, we'll see that become not quite like the de facto standard across the board on devices, but at least for the mid to higher end ones becoming the standard. And by next year, it'll become, I think, the norm across the board.
Wow. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know they were going to have, greater accuracy. And I know certain devices I've had for sport have higher sampling rates as you go up the chain in terms of price. Yep. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area that, last summer when I first looked at it, it was kind of like, yeah, this is maybe better in a few scenarios, but maybe kind of blah in others. But these companies, Garmin and Coros and others, depend on their chipset providers, and those chipset providers have been working month after month to deliver firmware updates that have really dramatically improved that accuracy over the last 6 to 8 months, where now it's noticeably better than their non-dual frequency kind of counterparts. And it's the point where it's like, yep, this makes a difference. This is definitely worthwhile.
Anything that's going to start taking the measuring off the wrist? I mean, we're all hoping for the wrist. The chest seems to have been where the accuracy has been consistently, but are there any, like you just mentioned the arm earlier, ears, I mean, any areas of the body right now that we should start seeing some product?
I don't think too much. I mean, I think people certainly wear optical armbands all the time. And I think in many cases, actually, an optical heart rate sensor on an armband is more accurate than a chest sensor for a lot of sports. And the reason is that it's not susceptible to dryness. So if you think about a cool fall run or a ride where you may not produce much sweat because you're not wearing many layers yet. You're just, out there and it's cool out. And so it may take 10 or 15 minutes to actually start getting some sweat. That helps connectivity for those chest straps. That's not an issue for optical heart rate sensors. So something like the Polar OH1 or OH1 Plus or Polar Verity Sense, those are optical heart rate sensors that in my testing will almost always outperform a chest strap in almost every scenario. So that's a good example where it does actually do better.
Are they coming out with features like what'd you say, that Polar OH1 Plus? Is that going to have something where you'll be able to have music built into it? Is it going to have the same features that a watch will have, or is that just primarily heart rate and you're done?
It's primarily heart rate. It can save some stuff, but I think companies have kind of tried that over the last 8 or 10 years, and the challenge is that people just end up going back to the wristwatch. And it's one of those things where you stick stuff there and people end up just doing duplicate everything, where it's like, oh, I got to do here and then do there. And then that's eventually just kind of falls off. Sort of like the old days when you used to load up a MP3 music player. And after, like a month or two, you never actually kept on updating those songs. And so you had the same songs in there for like years. It's sort of the same problem.
Back in the Napster era,
Exactly. Exactly.
I'm feeling old now. Oh my God. That's unbelievable. Derek?
One question about devices, heads-up display devices. I know there's like swimming goggles, probably stuff for cyclists. Anything else you've seen?
We've seen, companies like swimming is there with the Form Swim goggles, the heads-up display, and that's decent. We've seen attempts with it in cycling. Garmin has their heads-up display goggle, the Very display goggle, and we've seen certainly lots of kind of smaller companies dabble in that area. It's almost the same challenge there, though, in that the expense of those devices tends to be really, really high because they're trying to pack in GPS and music and speakers and all these sort of things. And then they have a really small battery, so you got to charge that whole thing too. But they never can get to the same feature level as the watch. And so we saw this a lot. Recon Jet, which eventually was bought by Intel, had this heads-up display. It looked really like futuristic, and it had a lot of features, and they wanted to ultimately be mainly for cyclists, but also for runners, a replacement for your bike computer or even your watch. But for them to get there feature-wise would have taken a decade because they're trying to compete with the Garmins of the world that have been doing this for, in the sports side, 15 years. So every little nuanced feature that you don't even think about anymore. Things when you press the start button on your watch, it's just you expect them to be there. Those are these 1% features. Some of those features, they don't matter to you. You never use them again. Like you may not ever use the metronome on your Garmin watch. It's there, but you probably don't use it. But for someone else, that's their most important feature. And that's why they choose a Garmin watch. And you imagine there are hundreds, if not thousands of these features on these sport watches that now these heads-up display companies have to replicate in order to be competitive. And they're trying to charge, $600 for some of these displays, which you're still going to look at your bike computer. And that's it. Just all those companies have continued to go out of business because it's a very, very hard business to break into.
This is more of a personal question. I mean, do you look at all the displays? I'm sorry, wrong way of describing it. All the features that these watches or wearables will give, and are those features that you find useful, or do you get overwhelmed sometimes when you're going to the display and you're clicking through and you're like, oh my God, this is just the one easy thing about Apple is it's mindless, right? Like you have no idea about computers. You know how to set your phone up. It's done, right? Like, do you feel like it gets a little overwhelming, or are they really simplifying things a lot better now?
I think it can be. I think the Garmin's, Polars, Sunos, et cetera, of the world have really learned in the last 2 to 3 years how important simplicity in the user interface it is. And we're seeing Garmin especially make huge shifts in those areas to make it simpler, to make it easier, to not to dumb it down, but to make it easier for the first time to get a device up and running and going. And it's starting to pay dividends, but it's a long battle. And it's, of course, a battle that's ultimately between, you have millions of people out there using these devices that want these features in this certain way versus other potential consumers that may not understand the value of having those added features. And so in some ways it's easier for a company like Wahoo or Chorus or others to break into the wearable market because they don't have the legacy baggage. And so, they can be judged rightly or wrongly on the small set of features they have for that particular price point, versus Garmin is being judged on all these extra features. They've got 15 years of legacy baggage that, you expect that feature to be there because it was there for the last 4 watches that you bought, versus you walk to some other competitor, it's like, oh, it doesn't have it? No big deal, moving on. And it's an interesting challenge.
Sometimes I do prefer that less is more, right? I like simple. I like to move on. That's what kind of freaked me out about the wearables, is that too many features almost can get a bit too discouraging when I'm really just looking for 3 or 4 functions out of it.
Yeah, exactly. Both my mom as well as my mother-in-law have very simple GPS running watches. They just wanted something where they wanted to be like, I'm just going to press start and go, and that's it. And when I'm done, I'm going to press stop, and I don't care about a run the rest of the day. I ran, right? What else is there to know? And that's it, right? And it's a different focus area, but it works well for them. And I think it's something that, like you said, the different things, different folks.
Awesome. Dave?
Final question for me, Ray. For filming video, is there any camera that you use specifically, or anything we should know about that you like?
Yeah, I think like for sports stuff, a GoPro is just the best option out there. At the end of the day, I use primarily GoPro Hero 10s, but the Hero 9 is pretty similar. It just works. I use it virtually every single day. I use it today, and it's easy to use and doesn't have a lot of the caveats that some of their competitors have. I like some of the smaller cameras from Insta360, like the Go 2 is a neat little camera that's small, but I find the trade-offs you have to make on battery life and storage capacity just a bit tough for what I do, but it depends on what someone's doing.
I was admiring your Courchevel picture back there.
Yeah.
Definitely
good times.
Definitely bucket list. I was just over snowboarding in Austria and Switzerland. And
okay, nice.
You brought the 360 up, and I was laughing because I went over there with this thing, and I was blown away by it. I mean, to even come home and hook that into the Oculus, I was now able to put the Oculus on my wife and be like, now you can see me and my friends ripping down the mountain. I mean, it was unbelievable. It's fascinating where technology has gone with all this sort of things. You can actually bring an experience home, which we were able to do by plugging this into that Oculus.
Yeah, it's cool. There's lots of cool stuff you can do, especially if you're willing to devote like the editing time to it, or the kind of that playback. I think one of the challenges the action camera industry faces, and they've admitted this. I mean, CEO of GoPro said this straight up, that it's very easy to film a bunch of stuff. It's very easy to go on vacation and shoot everything, right? What's more challenging is to make something of what you shot, and whether or not that's doing something quickly after the a day on the slopes, and you got to quickly like get an edit up that just takes you a few minutes, that automatically happens, and that you can share to social media and be done with it, or to do something more complex. That's things that these companies have to continue to work on.
Well, Ray, listen, we really appreciate your time. I mean, is there anywhere that, I'm looking right now, I see you're on Instagram. Is that you there? DCRAIN Maker?
Yep, DC Rainmaker should be on, I am on Instagram, and also on YouTube, or just simply the website, dcrainmaker.com, for all the reviews there as well.
Oh, and you got a dope page also. I'm your newest follower right there. So thank you. And for anyone watching this right now, check out Ray's page. It's pretty awesome. And
yeah, good, well-written reviews and good videos to support. So
unbelievable.
I appreciate it.
We really
Thank
appreciate your time. Very, very educational.
Yeah, can't wait for your TikTok account too.
What's that?
I can't wait for his TikTok account too.
I have drawn the line. The line is there.
Right. I said the same thing. Man, it's over. It's over now. All right. So, Ray, thanks for your time. Derek, that was amazing. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thank you for jumping on.
Thanks a lot, guys. Yep, no problem at all. Appreciate it. Have a good one.